Why are a lot of white people super sensitive towards racism towards blacks, but then don't care about racism towards Asians, Indians, etc? I noticed this a while ago too. I pointed it out to one of my siblings who was very political about BLM but would still make jokes about Asians and Indians which he would not accept if they were directed towards black people. I wasn't saying BLM was insignificant or anything, but it was something I noticed. It's very easy to be casually racist towards me, Asian, and whenever I point it out they say it's just a joke and don't take it literally. I don't have an answer for it though or why it's more acceptable. I feel like it's not taken as seriously and I wish I knew why. Indian here, even the liberal spaces on social media are extremely racist towards us. This may relate to the concept of the model minority. Within the Asian community we've established the ideology do what you're told, and in the strive to succeed we became the model for you to through hard work can succeed, and in that fashion we have managed to do most of that despite the burdens of racism that is thrown at us. It simply became normal that we were burdens of jokes because regardless we chose to stay quiet to follow the rules and do what you're told because it is what kept us out of the fray and getting killed trying to get some dignity. For the worse, the model minority has become this show dog for Americans to show off when it benefits them and ideally shut down when they are not following what you're told. Double standards. Not looking at the full picture, and they don't really care about the racism issue but only about the social perspective of racism. Had this issue in our school back when I was there 10+ years ago. Everyone would kick off if there was any racism towards any of the black people, and rightfully so, but then the black people and every other race would happily bag on the Indians, Pakistanis and Chinese people with open and loud racist jokes and no one would care. I can't say, but hopefully their defense of cultures will eventually spread. Could just be taking them a minute to realize the equivalency and hypocrisy. Age, maturity, and self-awareness are not widespread in kids and apparently some adults. Not just some adults, most. That's why democracy never works quite as well as they teach you in elementary school. I mean, people can't even figure out that leggings is underwear and not pants, because you can see the exact shape of butt and crotch. Most kids in school are not choosing the jokes they make based off a moral standard against racial prejudice. They're just avoiding the jokes that they understand are socially unacceptable. Whites still making jokes that they find funny. I guarantee that there are much greater consequences for using the word N than for using a word offensive to Asians, like chink. My school has the same problem. I'll also make the bold claim that this discrepancy in racist humor is the case for all the kids in your school, not just the Caucasian ones. When you realize most woke white people are really white supremacists with guilty consciences, their behavior starts to make sense. There's also a growing mindset that black Americans can't be racist, so a lot of their own racist attacks against Asians, Latinos and especially Jews get ignored. I might get a lot of flack for this, but as an Indian dude, the only racism I have faced in the US has been by black people. Even though I support BLM and its overall agenda, the fact is that a lot of black people treat foreign brown people as somehow inferior to them. Of the few times I faced racism, I got called a chacho once by a bunch of college kids, all black. Like, WTF, is that even a racist term? Maybe do it properly if you have to, jackasses. There are tons of racists out there. Black, white, Indians, Asians, etc. But it just goes to show that people only focus on white versus black racism, not realizing that every racial group gets to face racism. As an Asian American, the only racism I've faced in the US is by black people as well, but they can't be racist cause they're black. I think right now people may be more aware of racism against black people because of Black Lives Matter, which may explain an increase in white people scolding racism against specifically black people. Maybe because they were more educated about racism against black people because of the recent movement. That could explain the specificity in race. I for one know a lot of people were oblivious before BLM rose. That of course doesn't excuse it. Racism against Asians is still extremely prominent, especially against East Asians during COVID-19. From the virus originating from Wuhan, definitely doesn't justify it one bit, but explains the rise. The simple answer? We don't know. It's extremely hypocritical to denounce racism against one oppressed group of people but turn around and contribute to oppression regarding another. Something you can do to prevent this is call them out on their behavior. It isn't your obligation, but it always helps to call out racism when you see it. This just shows how a number of people are only politically correct for the brownie points and for clout. I also love how racist Reddit is to non-black minorities. I understand most are Americans and that the American race sensitivity centers around black people, but LMAO. Indians are so rappy. Indians are so creepy. Indians are street shitters. Don't walk on the same pavement as an Indian guy. All these things get so casually dropped by Redditors. Not bothered by it of course, but their hypocrisy is just so astounding. No respect for people who take this on the chin and move on. Black people and Muslims will frick you up if you say this crap. Indians don't care and thus we are soft targets or low-lying apples. Replace black with Indians and see how quick you get banned from any subreddit. I always thought these were jokes. Indians are creepy. Chinese eat dogs and black people steal stuff etc etc. But what's with the Indians going on to accept the racist labels are the gospel truth? Hadur, as an Indian I can confirm Indians are rappy. Like dude, shut up, maybe you are rappy but leave me and all other Indians out of this LMAO. White personnel here. I 100% care about racism towards Asians and Indians. I have an Asian friend whose father was an immigrant from China and the amount of racism that he experienced daily is astounding. I hope one day people will start to recognize racism against them too. In my opinion, I think that a lot of American whites will support BLM so that they don't get called racists and be on the wrong side of social politics. Because Asians aren't being gunned down in the streets by cops, they obviously aren't a problem, right? It's horrible and hypocritical and just shows that humans are the real problem. I personally think people shouldn't get so worked up over jokes and humor, but I also think there's a line that shouldn't be crossed. Unpopular opinion. Because black people are the hot button issue, there's no way to look more virtuous than to stand up for black people in the public eye. You have to make sure everyone knows you're not a racist. So make sure to post about it, instead of just living a normal life where your improvement is to stop race being the issue and to just treat everyone the same, like you'd hope to be treated by total freaking strangers, indifferently, and with basic human decency. My wife is Native American and I hear about this all the time. My mother-in-law even talks about how she feels left out of the BLM movement. We drive around the Midwest and see ignorant white people with big signs in their yards that say crap like tribal pride, fear the spear, along with poorly drawn native figures on them. Many schools teams still happen to be named after native tribes and concepts. Super sad really. I believe this is a big reason why a lot of people like the idea of BLM but hate the actual movement. It should make our communities more inclusive, not less inclusive. Point blank, Indians and Asians tend to hold respectable jobs, like doctors and professors. White people see that as them being acceptable minorities. It's a very real bias. If they came across a poor Asian neighborhood where kids were hanging out on the streets, listening to loud music and causing chaos, they'd be equally as racist. We've been fed certain images of certain races. First comment on Reddit, so please be kind. I am an Desi guy, Indian heritage, but my family line has not lived in India for over 140 years, from South Africa and now living in Europe. Racism exists against us as well. It's just a lot more subtle than with blacks. In the South African context, blacks have had it much worse than Indians during apartheid, and in their own land too. From my understanding, it is very similar to the segregation laws in the USA. This racism still continues to this day, and although not codified in law, it is still a huge obstacle for them to overcome. I see movements like BLM as important to give them some dignity and spread awareness of the blatant discrimination that they face. I've mainly created this account to also share that Indians were the next group of slaves once the Atlantic slave trade was abolished. We were called indentured laborers and were taken from India to countries like South Africa, Suriname, Fiji and Mauritius, to name a few, to work the plantations. These Indians were taken on fixed-term contracts with pay and the opportunity to return to India after. However, a tax was levied on those wages, often up to 100% of the wages, and many Indians were not given an opportunity to return to India. This system was devised as a more humane system to chattel slavery, but the outcome was the same: extremely cheap or free labor for the British. Indians were seen as second class to whites in apartheid South Africa, and consequently given more opportunities than blacks. This has helped us in becoming an extremely successful demographic. A lot of this is down to us keeping our culture and traditions relatively intact, and the high focus on education and entrepreneurship. We know that our only real asset is our minds, and we do extremely well to make that work for us. The racism we face is a lot for subtle in that we have to be really good at the things we do to get the same reward as a white person. In my personal experience, I can do the same job to the same degree quality as a white person, yet I will be paid less and have my work picked apart a lot more than a white person does. In South Africa, there is a joke that if you want something cheap but good quality, go to an Indian. Together with our stoic culture, we do not fight as hard as blacks do for recognition. We are generally a successful group of people, but this is despite the subtle racism we face. As some other comments have mentioned, the stereotypes about call centers, rape, etc. exist even for those of us who have no modern day connection to India. I think we are just seen as easy targets who won't fight back. This was really interesting to read about. I've never thought about the Indian experience in South Africa before. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I think we are just seen as easy targets who won't fight back. Your last sentence here makes me feel especially sad and contemplative. It's not popular to admit it, but the amount you're allowed to denigrate a group is directly proportional to the consequences of doing so. If you criticize Muslims, you'll get your head cut off. If you say something racist against blacks, you're like to get your butt beat and lose your job if it's posted to social media. You can literally campaign to remove Mexicans from the county and get elected president. You can create anti-Christian subreddits, but obviously not anti-Muslim. It's not popular to admit it, but the amount you're allowed to denigrate a group is directly proportional to the consequences of doing so. Ain't that the truth? Hi, Wok here. In my experience, it's because of Black history everyone knows black people were slaves, and how much they were oppressed, violence rates, etc. But no one thinks about Asians, Native Americans, literally any other race. I've only really experienced racism from black people, but what do I get when I bring it up? That I'm being racist. It's a double standard. Because most of them are virtue signaling. They don't really care about racial injustice. They just want to show other people that they are conscientious for caring about racism. If they really cared about racism, they wouldn't allow a situation where Asians need 400 more SAT points to get into the same college as lesser performing minorities. Hate people acting like this doesn't happen on Reddit. Check comments on any thread related to India, even related to space program. It's all about rape, bathrooms and call centers. Liberal parts of Reddit is extremely racist towards other races other than black or Hispanic. Much obliged brother, you mango wind. Because it's all about trends and whatnot. It's like when a big accident happens. Everyone has to express their sympathies even though they don't care and have no idea what's going on. Put your Facebook filters on, everyone. Strength through unity. It makes no sense to me. They are printing American history books for school that don't mention the Trail of Tears. They are leaving out the Trail of Tears. They don't want to talk about the crap we did to the Native Americans. People might start to realize how crappy our government really is. America is crap. I hope we burn. If you want to know if you can trust the government, ask a Native American. Nor do they include the Japanese internment camps. Former white kid from America here. Still white, no longer kid. I'd say it's just more socially unacceptable to say racist things about black people for some reason. Probably partially because of America's history with racism geared specifically toward black people, and also because black people are the second most populous minority in the US, behind only Hispanic Latinos. Obviously this depends on where you live, but I'll say personally my high school in NW, Indiana, 1 hour from Chicago, was mostly black kids and white kids. There were a few other ethnicities but they were far outweighed. Also, media coverage of BLM recently and historically. Possible that some white people don't know racial slurs which are hurtful towards other ethnicities just due to lack of education of them, exposure to them, so while they may not say those things themselves they also don't recognize them as bad. Although with context and tone it is usually apparent they are some kind of insult at the very least. Just spitballing here. Overall, better awareness of this problem should be spread because while I am white and I could never understand what real racial discrimination is like, racist people are not cool, and the more people truly fighting against them, and not just for some stupid internet hearts or up dudes, the better. Because when you milk false victimization like the black community does, it's embarrassing to see Asian and Indian communities come from poorer backgrounds yet succeed at a much higher rate. Black culture is unwilling to admit that black culture keeps black people oppressed, and Asian and Indian culture doesn't demand guilt from white people like black people do. They gotta blame someone for their problems, so long as it isn't themselves. Because right now BLM and black people in general have the popular wave behind them, they did get the grunt of the pain in American history. Frankly, BLM doesn't give a crap about anyone else. I think it's because anti-black racism is something that is so noticeable in our country's history. Black people were kept as slaves for centuries, and segregation and Jim Crow laws specifically directed toward black people existed for decades after. These types of historical events are tangible for people, so anti-black racism becomes something that people think about, while Asian Americans, indigenous people, Hispanic people, etc. also have a history of discrimination in the United States. A lot of it isn't taught in the same way that slavery and segregation are, so people aren't as thoughtful about it. That's the way they've been trained. They get a little treat from the authorities when they act like that, then it grew into getting little treats from their peers as they grow up. They don't get those treats with Asians or Indians and don't see them as inferior, so it's not immediately obvious to them that they're acting jerky. The white liberals, who have been posing as our friends, have failed us. The white liberal is the worst enemy to America and the worst enemy to the black man. White liberals are those who have perfected the art of selling themselves to the black man as our friend to get our sympathy, our allegiance and our minds. The white liberal attempts to use us politically against white conservatives, so that anything the black man does is never for his own good, never for his advancement, never for his own progress. He is only a pawn in the hands of the white liberal. I only cite these things to show you that in America the history of white liberal has been nothing but a series of trickery designed to make us think that the white liberal was going to solve our problems. Our problems will never be solved by the white liberal. The only way that our problems will be solved is when the black man wakes up, cleans himself up, stands on his own 2 feet, stops begging the white liberal and takes immediate steps to do for ourselves the things that we have been waiting on the white liberal to do for us. The media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent look guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power, because they control the mind of the masses. The Democrats are playing you for a political chump, and if you vote for them, not only are you a chump, you are a traitor to your race. Malcolm X. White liberals only come out against racism against blacks because they are pandering for their vote. They don't actually give a crap. So among the other more surface answers, think about the demographics in question. The second largest demographic in America is African Americans, followed by Hispanic, then Asian, and finally Native Americans. Read historically, since 2010 the Hispanic population has exploded to surpass African Americans in total. When following the numbers, it's far easier to see the systematic racism lobbed at African Americans and thus the media and populace focus on that. There has also been a shift from just one focus on a single group to focusing on POC, people of color, as a whole. This trend will likely continue well into the next decade. So why do white peoples focus on African Americans with regard to racism? It's just more visible, but the focus is shifting. Addition, the words in parentheses. I'm not sure how it goes in other countries, but the American public education system typically has a large section on the US Civil War, which has a big portion of slavery storytelling. typically only portrayed as black African slaves and white slave owners, and then there's usually a big section on the segregation, both legal and social, from after the Civil War the whole way up to the 1960s. My school had us watch Roots, but that's about all we covered. I didn't find out about other types of racism or even how misrepresented American history was until long after I graduated. I see your viewpoint. I think this is a good question to ask. I noticed this issue when the term BIPOC came about. As a Latina, I found this term to be highly offensive because it clearly names two groups and throws all other groups under an umbrella term. I laugh at this analogy, but it's kind of like Diana Ross and the Supremes. Can anyone name who the other Supremes were? And do we frankly care? I'm really rallying against BIPOC becoming mainstream and the clear hierarchy of POC causes. Being POC, we all inhabit different branches of the same tree that is living as the other. Because racism against African Americans is all that's talked about openly right now. You don't hear Japanese Americans talking about the internment camps, or Chinese Americans, Irish Americans talking about the railroads. Every once in a while you might hear about the Native American genocide, but not nearly as often. You're not gonna get as many internet points standing up for Arabic people as you do with white man bad, which is why you don't see feminists talking about the treatment of women in Muslim countries. Being against anti-black racism is just what's in right now. A legit movement was started, and it became popular and was hijacked. Everyone wanting validation on the internet has taken this up to virtue signal. Buttholes finding enough safety in the crowd anonymity use it to rob, loot, and destroy. Adult children that want to lash out at the world use it as an excuse to throw temper tantrums and destroy everything around them without actually solving anything. Because people like to do things that are safe and easy, to virtue signal. It's very easy to be super sensitive on black issues, but it is not as popular to stand up for Muslims, for example. So the herd decides whose feelings we should care about. I'm Turkish and I get a lot of kebab jokes, and honestly there's no problem, especially if it's my friends making fun of me. But after another joke about me eating kebabs, I asked them if they would have the same courage to make a joke about me eating watermelon-free chicken if I was black, and the truth is number. Because it is safe to make fun of a Turkish person. Who's gonna come after your racial insensitivity? Nobody. Making a stereotypical black joke is riskier because unlike other minority groups, they apparently have some power. I don't know why, but I'm 100% sure this is a thing I've encountered. I think the media has a lot to do with it. They focus so much on black oppression and then the police brutality and Black Lives Matter doesn't make it any better, but you're right. There is racism, prejudice towards Asians, Indians, Hispanics that are overlooked. This pandemic showed people's true colors towards Asians. It's sad. As a South Asian living in the US, I definitely have had my fair share of racist comments thrown at me. Cow worshipper, Indian food looks like diarrhea, Indians don't need to know how to flirt because they have arranged marriages, etc. But as for why white people are sensitive toward racism toward blacks, slavery, Jim Crow, lynching of black people, white slave masters raping black women and getting away with it, etc. The crimes white people have committed against black people are way worse. Then there is this notion that if you make a racist comment against black people, you will be vilified on social media or you will cause a riot or a huge protest. Maybe you might get killed. Many white people think they will face major backlash for any racist jokes against black people. Many white people are scared of being called a Karen. They don't have the same fear of Asians or Indians. It's bad. Same reason brown people get sensitive about racism towards themselves then don't bat an eye when they do the same to black people. Some people are under the impression that racist remarks aren't considered racist if it hasn't gone viral and there are protests against it. Hence why nobody talks about black on black crimes or think it's an issue when more black people get killed in gang violence than what BLM is protesting against. It's the squeaky wheel. Black people complain the most about racism, so people pay more attention to it. Asians don't really complain. Asians and Indians do complain. It's just that the media and everyone else chooses to ignore it. Just so you know, white people is not the same thing as Americans. But guess who is the loudest in social media and media in general? As a Slav from Europe, I don't give a frick about 90% of the things Americans do, while I do give a frick about many other things they don't. I honestly couldn't care less about black people since in my country, there are like 5 of them, and my ancestors never enslaved black people, or any other as far as I know, so we don't have any sort of guilt and self-hatred Americans do. You can't white privilege me since I'm poor as frick and my country never harmed anyone. We don't go to wars and none of that crap. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.